Okie dokie smokies. So here we go. The blood begins to flow. Oh, so very, very scary. The arrival of the inevitable, the American Civil War. This is something that's been brewing for a long, long time. The growing tensions between the two regions of the country, the North and South, over slavery, over states' rights, over economy, over everything. It's been building and building and building, and now we've come to the point where it's all going to spill over. So the, this divide between the North and South is much more than just slavery. Certainly, slavery is the flashpoint. Slavery is the issue that is the central issue. Everything seems to revolve around slavery at this point, but there's lots of other things that are dividing, creating this divide between the North and the South that are making them feel like they are two completely different countries. And as we progress through the 1800s, this chasm grows wider and wider and wider. But again, these are feelings and these are tensions that have been there since the days of colonial America, and they've just become more and more exacerbated over time. So, the North has all these large, prosperous cities. They have all the industry. We've gone through the market revolution where we have industry, we have factories that are making things for mass production for sale, right? Instead of people making stuff in their homes, which they had done prior to the market revolution. We now have the market revolution, and we've got factories that are making mass making some products for consumption. All of that industry is in the North. The North has pretty much all the large cities. Any large city that you can think of in the United States in the mid 1800s, almost all of them are northern. Boston, Philadelphia, New York. Um, these are all northern cities. The South remains a very rural, agrarian based economy. This is very much the economy that Jefferson envisioned the country having. Jefferson envisioned everybody being these, what he called yeoman farmers, where they own these small plots of land and they produce pretty much everything that they need on their farms. The North certainly is the vision of Hamilton, these large industrial centers. So the North and South have very different economies and very different ways of living. North has the cities. The South is still very rural. They have very few large cities. They have New Orleans and Charleston, and that's about it. The North is extraordinarily well connected. Most of the American system that Henry Clay has been pushing, almost all of that money has been put into the North to create these roads and to lay the railroad tracks, which are now the new technological marvel of the time. Because now you can travel wherever you want very rapidly, as long as there's tracks there, right? Before, we had the steamship, so you can move very quickly up and down rivers, but that was only limited to only where water was. Now with railroads, you can go everywhere. And the North is very well connected with a good road system and railroads, thanks to the American system. And they have connections all over the world. Most of the large ports, shipping ports, are all in the North, Philadelphia, in Boston, and New York City. So they're very well connected with each other, and they're very well connected with the rest of the world. However, the South, they don't have a very good road system. They're not well connected with each other. They're certainly not well connected with the North. There's only one rail line that comes from the North into the South. So the South has very few miles of railroad. They have very few well-developed roads. They have one rail line that connects them to the North. They have some large ports, Charleston and New Orleans, but certainly not the size or scale that the North has. So they don't have these connections around the world that the North has. they have different religions, very different Protestant religions in the North. The North is mostly Methodist, which is a very reserved, very stately, very dignified, I guess is the way that they would put it, uh, style of worshiping. It was very quiet. You would file into the church and you would sit down and you would listen to the sermon and remain very, very silent during the sermon. The South are mostly Baptist. And the Southern version of the Baptist religion is very raucous. It's very loud. If you think of yeah, preachers on TV, right? They're running around and they're yelling and they're people are clapping their hands and shouting responses and stuff from the audience. Those are mostly Southern Baptists, two very different styles of Protestant Christianity. North has Methodist, very reserved. South has Baptist, which is very loud and very active. They have different types of literature. They have different writers. Um, the South has writers like Edgar Allan Poe, who is like the Stephen King of his time. He wrote mostly pretty macabre kind of horror stories. The Raven, The Pit and the Pendulum, the Murder in the House the Fall of the House of Usher. I'm sorry, Fall of the House of Usher. Um, so he wrote The Telltale Heart. He wrote a lot of these kind of macabre horror stories, but he also writes a lot of pro-slavery essays about the benefits and how good slavery is. The North has abolitionists like Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson, who write a lot of abolitionist essays and about how this is a moral stain and a moral a real moral challenge for the country to have slavery. But the most famous writer at the time is a young lady by the name of Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose father was a Methodist preacher who was a very active abolitionist, a very well known active abolitionist at the time. And Harriet Beecher Stowe writes the book of the time that kind of frames the entire argument against slavery. He writes this book called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and Uncle Tom's Cabin follows the lives of a slave as they're sold from family to family to family to family. And some of the families treat them fairly well. Other families don't treat the slave very well, and they talk about rape and beatings and things like that. The most egregious, the worst character in the book is a slave owner by the name of Simon Legree, who is particularly brutal and particularly heartless. And it is the caricature of Simon Legree that fixes in the minds of abolitionists across the country that this is the way all slave owners are. All slave owners are this brutal. All slave owners are this angry. All slave owners are this mean. And it fixates in the minds of abolitionists. This is the way all slave owners are. And most slave owners, there certainly were slave owners like Simon Legree, but a lot of slave owners, other than owning a slave, which is not cool, you know what I'm saying? You shouldn't have a slave, and that's all right. But most slave owners treated their slaves reasonably well, right? I mean, if you're not feeding your slaves and if you're continuously beating your slaves, it's hard for the slave to go out and work if they're hungry, if they have broken bones and things like that. Certainly, rapes were very commonplace. That was extraordinarily commonplace. Rapes, and there were beatings and there were whippings for any transgression. But they certainly were not in the same category as Simon Legree was. Now, this book becomes a huge bestseller. It sells over 300,000 copies during the 1850s. And this is a monstrous sale of a book back then. At times, it was selling better than the Bible did in the country. So it's a very large read, very well read, influential book. In fact, when Abraham Lincoln gets the opportunity to meet Harriet Beecher Stowe, Abraham Lincoln remarks, "So this is the young lady who started the war." That's how influential this book becomes. All right. So in the middle of all this, we're in a process of manifest destiny, this belief that we're going to dominate this landmass from sea to shining sea, and we're going to fill it up with Americans, and we're going to show that Christianity is the greatest dominant form of religion out there, that it is the white men who are going to make this country what it can be, should be, will be. Certainly, Indians have not done that. That this is the patriotic duty, right? To do this. Their manifest destiny encompasses all those things. It's about religion. It's about race. It's about patriotism. So as people moved further and further west in pursuit of manifest destiny, railroads follow them across the country. And soon, the government begins to realize we need to build a transcontinental railroad, a railroad that you can get on in New York City or in Philadelphia or in Charleston. You can get on the railroad and in a couple of days get off that train in California. So they began making plans to build a transcontinental railroad. Now, the original plan is that the railroad will come out of New Orleans. New Orleans has a lot of railroads coming into it from all over, right? The one rail line coming from the north comes into New Orleans. So the belief is that this railroad would go from New Orleans and go across the south because, very practical reason, it's a lot flatter down here. It's easier to build the transcontinental railroad down here because it's fairly flat, right? You get further north, you begin running into mountains like the big Rocky Mountains right in the middle of the country. So, in anticipation of building this transcontinental railroad across the south, this little strip of land down here, the southern part of Arizona, the southern part of New Mexico, this here was still owned by Mexico. And in 1853, this is bought. It's called the Gadsden Purchase because the guy who was the principal negotiator in this deal, his name was Gadsden. So it's known as a Gadsden Purchase. And it was bought from Mexico because this land here was the flattest piece of land that they could find. So this is bought from Mexico in 1853 with the express purpose of it being used to build a transcontinental railroad coming out of New Orleans and across the south. So the Gadsden Purchase buys this land from Mexico. Enter in this guy. Quite the hairdo he has. Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas. Now, Stephen Douglas is from Illinois, and he is very interested because he's from Illinois. He wants the Transcontinental Railroad to come out of Chicago, which in 1850s is still a very small, very dusty, fairly insignificant town out in the western frontier. But he knows if the railroad comes through Chicago, if Chicago becomes the hub for the railroads, right? You have all these railroads coming into it and all these railroads going out of it. Immediately, Chicago becomes an immensely important, powerful, rich community. So he has an interest to do this because he's from Illinois and he wants to do something to bring commerce and business into Illinois. So he wants the railroad to go through Chicago. He's also the chairman of the most powerful, most important committee in Congress at that time, Committee of the Territories. This committee is in charge of creating and setting up all of these territories, all of this land out in the West. He's in charge of organizing those territories and creating new territories and then eventually new states of all of this land in the West. It's a very powerful, very important position. He's in charge of it. So he's going to create two territories out in the West to bring the railroad through because the railroad companies told Douglas, we don't want to go through Chicago because once you get outside of Chicago, you get into unorganized territory. Essentially, there's no government there. There's a lot of anarchy, a lot of craziness out there. It's not organized. If you're going to have us bring the railroad out of Chicago and then go west, you've got to set up some organization. You've got to put some government in place. You've got to have some structure out there to ensure that our trains are going to be safe. So, in order to accommodate this, he creates the territories of Kansas and Nebraska, which will set up, territories and government and so on and so forth, coming out of Chicago going west. Now, this is not going to sit well with the South because this means that the Transcontinental Railroad is going to move from New Orleans to Chicago, and the South, once again, is going to lose out on business and wealth to the North. So Stephen Douglas knows this, right? Stephen Douglas knows that the South is going to be very angry about the North getting all the good stuff again. Stephen Douglas wants to be president at some point. That's his ultimate aspiration. And he knows he's going to have to give the South something in return, right? If he wants to win presidency, he's probably going to have to get some votes from the South. So, as a bone, he's going to throw a bone to the South and say, look, I'm going to pull the Transcontinental Railroad out of New Orleans. I'm going to put it in Chicago, but I'm going to give you an opportunity here. What if I give you the opportunity to expand slavery into the North and into the West? Oh, now this is appealing to the South because the South had long been told slavery is a Southern thing. Now the South has the opportunity to move slavery north and west. And remember, Nebraska can't grow cotton, so slavery is probably not going to work in the Nebraska territory. But parts of Kansas can. They have the right soil, they have the right climate, they can grow cotton and some of these other large cash crops. Okay. Now, here's how this is going to work. Okay. If you remember, the Compromise of 1850 said that moving forward, all new territory or land coming into the country, right, all new states would have the opportunity to vote if they were going to be free or slave. So now, with the creation of the Kansas-Nebraska territory, there's an opportunity to vote to be slave or free. Nebraska is probably not going to be, this is Nebraska here, Nebraska is probably not going to vote to be slave because it just won't work there. They can't grow anything there really. Any of these big cash crops that require a lot of labor, but parts of Kansas can. So Kansas is an opportunity for slavery. So thousands of pro-slavery settlers begin to flood into Kansas, right? Thousands of pro-slavery settlers are coming in, hoping that when the vote comes up, they're going to have enough votes there to make Kansas a slave state. Thousands of abolitionists, New England abolitionists, go, holy cow, we can't let this happen. So they start flowing into Kansas themselves, hoping that when the vote comes up, there's enough abolitionists there to keep Kansas as a free territory. So now all of a sudden you've got all of these people, thousands of people with very different views on the number one issue of the day, living in a pretty close proximity with each other. This is a recipe for disaster. Among these abolitionists coming in is a Methodist preacher from New England. He's from Massachusetts. His name is John Brown. John Brown is probably absolutely, completely, totally insane. He's like a couple of burgers short of a Happy Meal, right? The elevator doesn't quite get all the way to the top. The lights are on, but nobody's really there. He's something else. He's just a crazy committed man, I guess you could say. Both sides quickly create these guerrilla militias, right? They're not organized professional armies. These are just they're farmers or they're settlers who are very passionate about their beliefs that we should be slave or we should be free, and they're going to take up arms to defend their beliefs. And they begin to terrorize each other all over Kansas. I mean, they're terrorist organizations. That's what they are. They are literally terrorist organizations. The abolitionists settled in and around Lawrence, Kansas, and I can see there Lawrence is misspelled. Well, that's great. It should be Law. They settled in and around Lawrence, Kansas. That's the stronghold of the abolitionists, and they begin to call their terrorist organization Jayhawkers. Ooh. This is the beginning of what becomes known as Bloody Kansas. And there's a picture of insane John Brown. And see, here's why history's cool, y'all. They named college mascots after historical events. The University of Kansas, their mascot are Jayhawkers, the Kansas Jayhawks. Oh, that's why history's cool, y'all. They named history. They named mascots after historical events. How crazy is it? University of Kansas named their school, named their mascot after a terrorist organization. Whew. That's why history's cool. They didn't name them the University of Kansas Fractions. Nobody's worried about that, except maybe fourth graders learning fractions. Jayhawkers. Ooh, Jayhawkers are scary. Huh. See, that's why history's so cool, y'all. All right, let's talk about Bloody Kansas. Oh, it doesn't look good, does it? May 21st, 1856. A band of drunken Southerners. So when you get those two words together, those are two words that should never be put together. Drunken and Southerners. You know bad stuff is going to happen, right? So there's this band of drunken Southerners, and what happens is, they're up on a hillside and they're looking down at Lawrence, and they go, "Well, dang, Jim Bob, we're out of alcohol." And it's getting late in the day. It's 10 in the morning. We need some more alcohol. You're right, Jimmy John. I bet that town down there in Lawrence has some alcohol. I'll bet they do. Let's go get it. So this band of drunken Southerners come, riding and a whooping and a hollering, and they go into Lawrence. They burned down some buildings, looted the bars, took all the alcohol. Now, no one's hurt or killed in this, right? It's just very chaotic, and there's fires and some destruction done. But it's very unnerving for this to happen. And so that just kind of amps up the tension in Kansas. And then on May 22nd, the very next day, one of the most unbelievable, one of the most crazy, one of the most insane events in American history takes place. There's a Massachusetts senator. His name is Charles Sumner. And Charles Sumner, like May 15th, a couple of days before, had given this fiery speech about the evils of slavery and how evil the people that supported slavery really were, that this was the devil's work and they were certainly not men of God. And he is particularly harsh on the state of South Carolina, which is one of the most outspoken advocates in defense of slavery. And he in the speech, Charles Sumner says some particularly bad things about the senator from South Carolina who didn't happen to be there at the time. Well, certainly word gets around. And on May 22nd, 1856, just as the Senate was getting ready to go, they sitting down in their chairs, getting ready to conduct the business of the day. And at the back of the Senate, there's two big double wooden doors at the back of the Senate chambers. Boom! The doors are kicked open. And standing in the doorframe is a South Carolina Representative, Preston Brooks. And Preston Brooks walks down the Senate aisle, down to Charles Sumner's desk, and he says, "Sir, you have libeled the great state of South Carolina and its fine, fine senator. And for that, you will pay." And with that, he raises his cane above his head and begins to just beat on Charles Sumner with his cane. Just beat him on the head and shoulder, like a whack-a-mole. Just beating Sumner with his cane. Holy cow! This is insane, right? Eventually, Brooks's cane breaks when he continues to beat Sumner with the broken part of the cane. Holy smokes! Eventually, right? It takes a minute. Have you ever been like in a classroom where a fight breaks out? And it's like so weird and so bizarre and just so kind of out of place that it takes a minute for it to register, right? Like you see the fight break out in classroom, you go, whoa, right? And it's just like so weird. This should not be happening. And it takes a minute for it to register that this is real. Same thing happens in the Senate. Like everybody in the Senate is like, what's going on here? Right? Eventually, Brooks is restrained and pulled away. Charles Sumner suffers a fractured skull as a result of this. He almost dies. He doesn't die. He eventually does come back into the Senate. But this is, I mean, we've just had a beating on the floor of the United States Senate of a United States senator by a member of the House of Representatives. This doesn't happen in the United States, right? This happens in other countries. This happens in developing countries who who are not as polite as American society, I guess. And now we've just had a United States senator beaten on the floor of the United States Senate by a member of the House of Representatives over the issue of slavery. Whoa. And it comes right after the attack on Lawrence. Oh boy. So, news begins to spread about this attack on Lawrence. And then, shortly after that, comes the word of Charles Sumner getting caned on the head on the Senate floor. And then, to make matters worse, it comes out that the South now sees Preston Brooks as a hero defending Southern way of life and Southern beliefs, right? He's out there fighting for us. So you take all of these things and put them together, and John Brown decides that only he can carry out the word of God, that God wants him to do this, that God wants him to get revenge for Lawrence and for the caning of Sumner and to teach the South a lesson about how and what God wants. So John Brown and his band of merry men go to a pro-slavery settlement in Kansas. It's along the Pottawatomie Creek, May 24th, 1856. Now, this is going to sound like a bad cliche, like from a bad book, but it's a true story. It was a dark and stormy night. Ooh, the rain is beating against the cabin, right? And the wind's blowing. There's thunder. Right? So if you've ever been out in the middle of nowhere, and I mean nowhere in the middle of the night, like you can't see your hand in front of your face. It's so dark out there. There's no lights. And then if you've ever been out there in the middle of a lightning storm, it's particularly spooky because when the lightning flashes, like everything lights up in this bright white light, and it's almost like a strobe light, and it's just momentary where everything is just illuminated bright white, right? So it's that kind of storm. Right, and there's thunder and lightning and rain. It's just a really bad storm. And then there's a knock at the door. Oh, must be dominoes. So one of these settlers, his name is James Doyle, goes and opens the door. As he opens the door, the lightning flashes in the background. And standing in the doorway is John Brown, who's a fairly large man. He's about 6'3", 6'4", 230, 240 pounds, 230, 240 pounds. I mean, he's a big man. And John Brown and his men rush into the cabin and say that they are here to do the work of God and to save mankind from the degradations of slavery. And John Brown and his band of merry men marched James Doyle and his three sons. They were very young kids. They were 7, 9, and 11, I think. They marched them out, and they get about 100 yards from the cabin, and then they just let loose on them and literally hacked them to pieces. Woof. After hacking them to pieces, just to make sure that, I don't know, that James Doyle's body's not going anywhere. I don't know, he doesn't have any legs. You don't have any legs, Lieutenant Dan? Well, James Doyle didn't have any legs. But to make sure he's not going anywhere and his arms are gone and his head has been cut off, John Brown picks up James Doyle's head and then shoots it through the forehead. Whoa! During the entire night, they're going to visit the cabins of five pro-slavery settlers, and they end up killing 5 pro-slavery settlers, including James Doyle and his sons. Whew. Now, here's the crazy thing. None of these settlers at Pottawatomie Creek participated in a raid on Lawrence. None of these settlers on Pottawatomie Creek had ever owned a slave. They just supported the idea of slavery for whatever reason, but they didn't own a slave and they weren't involved in the raid on Lawrence. But John Brown, believing that he's doing the work of God, kills them. In the days that followed the attack on Pottawatomie Creek, both abolitionist and pro-slavery guerrilla armies, the Jayhawkers and everything, they began to roam the plains of Kansas looking for the enemy and killing anybody who they thought or they knew was against their beliefs. So if the pro-slavery people find an abolitionist family, they attacked them and killed them. If abolitionist, the Jayhawkers find pro-slavery settlers, they would attack and kill them. This is known as Bloody Kansas. Essentially, what you get a sneak preview of coming attractions. A mini civil war breaking out on the plains of Kansas. Holy cow! Because of this, John Brown was kicked out of Kansas. And he goes back to Massachusetts. But we're not done with John Brown. He's going to come back into the story again. And then comes maybe the most famous Supreme Court case of the 1800s. 1856, a young black man, Dred Scott, who is a slave, sues for his freedom. Now, Dred Scott is owned by a soldier in the United States Army. And the soldier happened to be stationed in Missouri, which is a slave state. Right under the Compromise of 1820, Missouri comes in as a slave state. So the soldier is stationed in Missouri, and he has Dred Scott as his slave. And then at some point in time, the soldier is then sent from Missouri to Wisconsin. He goes to Wisconsin for a time because he's stationed there. And he takes Dred Scott with him to Missouri as his slave. Now, Wisconsin is a free state. And then at some point in time, Dred Scott goes back to Missouri with his owner when the soldier is sent back to Missouri after his tour of duty or whatever was done in Wisconsin. So Dred Scott sues for his freedom. His argument it's a pretty clever argument. Dred Scott's argument is, look, I was a slave in Missouri. In Missouri, slavery is legal. But then I was taken to Missouri or to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a free state, and I was taken there. I didn't escape to Wisconsin. I'm not a runaway slave. I was taken there by my owner, and I lived for a period of time in Wisconsin, and I was taken there by my owner. I didn't run away. I was taken there. Since Wisconsin is a free state, and I lived in Wisconsin for a period of time, and I was taken there, I didn't run away. I'm free. Ooh. Now, Dred Scott sues not only for his freedom, but on behalf of all of the runaway slaves who had escaped to the north, only to be recaptured and brought back. He said those slaves who ran away and made it to the north, they should be free as well. Oh boy. Goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the guy that you see on the right here. His name is Roger Taney. Roger Taney is the Supreme Court Justice. He's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And Roger Taney is pro-slavery. Their ruling is a remarkable, shameful ruling. Roger Taney writes that Dred Scott cannot sue because he's not even a citizen. He is a piece of property. And property does not have the right to sue because property has no rights. Dred Scott is not a citizen. In effect, Dred Scott is not even a human being. He is a piece of property, and property have no rights. Oof. The South is overjoyed at this. The South, for the first time, the federal government, it seems like, has validated and legitimatized slavery. The South cannot believe this ruling. They are so happy with the ruling. Now, the North, oh, the North is furious. The North is seething. Oh, they're so angry. And they blame the president of the United States, James Buchanan, for this, right? The president always gets the blame. The president always gets the glory, even when they have nothing to do with either one. So the North is angry that the Supreme Court, that the federal government has now said that slavery has some legal legitimacy, and they blame Buchanan for this ruling. Oh, well, guess who this doesn't sit well with? Our hero, John Brown. So John Brown has a vision from God. And God told John Brown that he needs to avenge this awful, sinful, disgusting, degrading Supreme Court ruling. And that God is on his side. And if God is on your side, you can't win, right? You can't, the other side can't win. You can't lose if God is on your side. God, you can beat mortal men, but you can't beat God. So John Brown tells his men, I had a vision, and God wants us to do something. They're going to arm the slaves. John Brown said, God told me what we need to do is get weapons in the hands of slaves and have them rise up and break the bonds of slavery and carry out the moral and the righteous cause of God, that all men should be free and that all men should never be slaves. So we need to get weapons into these slaves. And we need to have them start an uprising, start an insurrection. And somebody asks, well, where are we going to get all these weapons? That's a lot of weapons. And John Brown says, oh, God has a plan for that as well. We need to take over the United States Arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Maryland. What? What? Wait a minute. we're we're going to attack a military base, like the 20 of us are going to attack a military base, and not just any military base. Oh, nay, nay. We're going to attack a military base that stores weapons for the United States Army. That's what an arsenal is, right? It is a storage facility for the weapons of the military. That's your plan? John Brown goes, oh, that's my plan. That's absolutely my plan. They've got a lot of weapons, and we can get a hold of them and get them out to the slaves. And somebody goes, well, that's crazy. That's insane. How are we going to take over a military base where they store the weapons? And John Brown goes, oh, it is crazy, but it's going to work. And do you know why? Because God is on our side. I think we're going to die, but okay. So they attack. John Brown and his band of merry men, his sons, and he's got a lot of sons, by the way. He's got lots and lots of kids. Attack the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry. And they win. They take over the arsenal. They drive the military out, and they take over the United States arsenal at Harper's Ferry. Holy smoky, it's a miracle. And then John Brown decides, well, taking over an arsenal is a lot of work. I'm a bit tired. Before we start sending the weapons out to the slaves, I'm going to take a nap. So he does. When John Brown wakes up, he finds himself surrounded by the United States Army. They want their weapons back. Oh, shocker. After a very brief battle, the Army takes back the arsenal. And they capture John Brown and his band of merry men and put them on trial. The South is furious with what happened. The South cannot believe the United States government would allow an arsenal to fall in the hands of a lunatic. How can this happen? And of course, the South blames James Buchanan. So Buchanan has John Brown put on trial. It's a kangaroo court, meaning that the outcome of the trial has already been determined before the trial even begins. John Brown is put on trial for treason. He's found guilty. Treason is the one crime in the United States Constitution for which there is a penalty attached to it. The penalty for treason is execution. And John Brown, within 10 minutes of this ruling, is marched out of the courthouse, down the courthouse stairs. They find the tallest tree, they find the shortest rope, and they let him swing till sunset. John Brown quickly hung. Here is a painting, excuse me, a painting of John Brown coming out of the courthouse after his ruling, being led out to be immediately hung. And it shows him leaning over and kissing an African-American child. That probably didn't happen. There's no real account from the time that this happened. But this artist believed that it did happen. And this becomes a very famous painting of the time of John Brown after being found guilty, being led out to be hung. Oh boy. So now, tensions have just really ramped up now. Things are really, really tense, and things seem to be really, really fractured in the country. 1854. A new political party is formed, and it's an amalgamation of all these smaller parties from all over the country. The Free Soil Party, which was a Western political party who argued that all the land in the West should be free. It should be not like free, like you don't have to pay for it, but free as in slavery should never be allowed in the West. And you have the remnants of the old Whig party that had kind of fallen apart. And you have all of these different parties, all these small political parties that were around at that time, all kind of come together and create this new political party in 1854 called the Republican Party. And it is a one issue party. It is anti slavery. That is their issue. Now, this is the modern day Republican Party. This is the beginning of the modern day Republican Party. Formed in 1854, it is a one issue party when it's formed. It's anti slavery. So, 1860, the South tells the country, if you elect a Republican, and the South is very worried about this because the North has all of the population, right? The South, they don't have anywhere near the number of people in the South that the North does. The South tells the North, if you elect a Republican, we will leave the country because we know what the Republicans are all about. The Democrats choose as their candidate for president in 1860 Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, the author of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which creates the new territories of Kansas and Nebraska and offers the South the opportunity to extend slavery into the North and the West. So they choose Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas. Now, the Southerners have had it. The South has had it with Northerners always being selected as presidential candidates. They're tired of that. So the Southern Democrats leave the Democratic Party. They create their own party, the Southern Democrat Party. Originality was not their thing. And they choose a senator by the name of John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. Now, you know something about John C. Breckinridge. You just don't know that you know something about John C. Breckinridge. So John C. Breckinridge was a very powerful senator. He was on the Committee of the Territories. He was a fairly influential member of the United States Senate. And when Colorado is being in the process of being formed and Colorado wants to be recognized as a formal territory, Colorado leaders in Colorado believed that if they named a mining town after one of the members of the Committee of the Territory, it would help their cause in becoming a recognized territory, the territory of Colorado. So they named this new mining town Breckinridge, Colorado, after John C. Breckinridge. Once the Civil War happens and John C. Breckinridge is a pro-slavery politician, he's very much in favor of slavery, Colorado decides that they can no longer have a town named after Breckinridge, John C. Breckinridge. So they changed the spelling of the name in Breckinridge, and they changed the I to an E. So then they can claim, well, no, Breckinridge is named after something else. It's not named after John C. Breckinridge, the pro-slavery politician. Oh, nay. It's a different Breckinridge. Well, it's not. It's still named after him, even though they changed the spelling. All right, so the Southerners nominate John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. The Republicans. The Republicans takes a long time. Now, candidates for the presidency are chosen at the presidential convention at that time. They don't have primaries and all that stuff leading up to it. They literally choose who their candidates will be at their convention. The convention's held a real function at that time. And the Republicans go through ballot after ballot after ballot after ballot trying to come up with a candidate. And none of the candidates are getting enough of the ballots, enough of the votes to become the candidate. So the Republicans finally land on a compromise candidate, a fairly unknown politician nationally. He's known in Illinois, but he's a fairly unknown politician from Illinois. They choose Abraham Lincoln. Now, why do they settle on Abraham Lincoln? They settle on Abraham Lincoln because he has soft views on slavery, meaning Abraham Lincoln is not a fire and brimstone abolitionist. That's not Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln believes, and these are evolving views that he had. At one time, he was kind of in favor of slavery. He didn't see a problem with slavery. And then eventually he evolves to the point where he goes, yeah, slavery is probably wrong. but it's a Southern thing. And as long as um, slavery remains in the South, that slavery is not allowed to expand beyond the South, slavery, although it's not right, can exist as long as it remains in the South. And that's where his views were in 1860. He's anti slavery, but he's not an abolitionist. Abolitionists want to get rid of slavery. That's not Lincoln yet. Lincoln is anti slavery. Slavery is wrong, but as long as it remains in the South, it's allowable. And that's why he's chosen, as a hope that it would be a compromise to the South, that the South wouldn't be angry about a Republican possibly being elected president and then seceding from the Union. They can say, look, he's not looking to take away your slaves. He just wants it to remain a Southern thing. 1860 election comes, and Lincoln is elected president. Oh boy. December 1860, before Lincoln even takes office. Lincoln is not going to take office until March of 1861. December 20th, 1860, the most outspoken, the most ardent defender of slavery, South Carolina, leaves the Union. The South Carolina legislature votes to secede from the United States. By February of 1861, Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas have all left the Union. They've all voted to leave the Union. Oh boy. February 4th through the 9th, 1861, the states that have left, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas, they all meet and they create a new country, the Confederate States of the United States. Or the Confederate States of America, Confederate States of America. And they choose a president, Jefferson Davis. And their model of government is essentially the Articles of Confederation that we had all sorts of problems with immediately after the Civil War or after the Revolutionary War. That's the form of government that they put in. States have all the rights. The federal government has very few rights and very little power. So they create the Confederate States of America, and they choose Jefferson Davis as their president. Now, there's still some very large states. The most important one, of course, is Virginia. Virginia is one of the wealthiest. It is one of the oldest. It is one of the most established. It is one of the most powerful. It is one of the richest southern states. On top of that, Virginia borders Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. So there's a lot of southern states still out there, including Virginia, who haven't left the Union yet. They're hoping that Lincoln will offer some sort of reconciliation at his inauguration and say, look, we can work things out. March 1st, 1861, Lincoln is inaugurated, and Lincoln offers no hope of reconciliation. Instead, he declares that secession is unconstitutional and states do not have the right or the ability to leave the country. Oh boy. April of 1861, Virginia votes to leave the Union. That's a big one. Now, Maryland, which is directly north of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is kind of sandwiched between the borders of Virginia to the south and Maryland to the north. Okay? Maryland, the Maryland state legislature is pro-slavery, and they're going to vote to leave the Union as well. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. If Maryland votes to leave the Union, it means that the capital of the Union, Washington, D.C., will be in the middle of the Confederacy. Hokey smoky, right? So here's Maryland, here's Virginia, and Washington, D.C. is kind of sandwiched in between there. Washington, D.C. would be in the Confederacy. So here's something that Lincoln does. Highly unconstitutional, but maybe it was necessary. The night before the Maryland legislature is going to vote on whether to secede from the Union or remain in the Union, the night before that vote takes place, Abraham Lincoln has federal troops arrest and detain all of the pro-slavery legislators. And he takes them out to Fort McHenry, which was the fort in the War of 1812 that Francis Scott Key saw being attacked by the British, and he wrote the Star-Spangled Banner about that battle at Fort McHenry. Lincoln has the Maryland legislators, the pro-slavery Maryland legislators, arrested and detained, put into the military prison at Fort McHenry in Baltimore until after the Maryland legislature votes. Since there is only the pro-union, anti-slavery legislators left in the Maryland legislature, they vote to remain in the Union. Only after that vote does Lincoln release the Maryland legislators from Fort McHenry. Hokey smoky. Now, of course, there's a court case. It goes to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said what Lincoln did was unconstitutional. Lincoln certainly could have been impeached, but all of the pro-slavery people who were in the House of Representatives and the Senate, they're all pretty much gone at this point. So there's no articles of impeachment brought against Lincoln, and Maryland never leaves the Union. Whoa, what a story, right? All right, April 12th, 1861. There's a United States Army fort, Fort Sumter, which is on the shores of Charleston, South Carolina. It's a United States Army base. Big problem. South Carolina is no longer part of the United States of America. So the Confederate forces go to Fort Sumter and say, you guys got to go, right? This is a different country now. This is the Confederate States of America, and we don't want a U.S. Army base here. Well, the United States Army says, well, we're not leaving. So the Confederate forces say, well, all right, and we got one thing to say to you. When a gang of wild dogs tries to run me down, I take the ringleader and make him look like a clown, unstoppable, untoppable. In case you forgot, I'm the king of the cats. I'm ready to rock. Let's go. And the Confederate forces attack Fort Sumter. They take it over. May of 1861, Arkansas and Tennessee joined the Union, or joined the Confederacy. And the Civil War has now begun. Oh boy. All right, Panthers, and that's it for today. So now we're at war, so we're going to deal with the Civil War and the things that come of that for the next couple of days. If you have any questions, you have any problems, you have any concerns, make sure you let me know. Until next time, Panthers, we'll talk to you later.